On Christmas Eve 2002, a 27-year-old pregnant woman just vanishes. Her dog is discovered wandering around in the neighborhood alone. Her purse, no screams, nothing. But as the search intensifies, the investigators find something very disturbing. I'm Jack, and on this channel, we dive into real stories that are disturbing, mysterious, and sometimes almost impossible to believe. Let's get started. On the surface, Scott and Laci Peterson looked like the perfect couple. Young, attractive, successful, living in Modesto, California. Recently married, preparing for their first child. Friends described Laci as warm, social, and very excited about becoming a mother. Scott came across as calm and polished. The kind of man that could walk into a room and make people immediately feel comfortable. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming, and almost nobody saw it. On the morning of December 24, 2002, Scott Peterson says he woke up and spent the morning with Laci. According to Scott, Laci planned to take the family dog walking while he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina. It sounded ordinary, too ordinary, and that would become one of the strangest things about this case. Because later, investigators would question every detail of Scott's story. The fishing trip, the timeline, the missing receipts, even the reason why he went out fishing on Christmas Eve in freezing weather. When Scott returned home later that day, he says Laci was gone. But their dog, Mackenzie, was still there, wandering outside with the leash attached. The house looked normal. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Laci's purse was still there. Her keys were still there, and her car was parked outside the house. It was as if she simply disappeared. At first, the case looked like a tragic missing persons investigation. Volunteers searched parks, flyers covered telephone poles, national media quickly picked up the story. The image of a smiling pregnant woman missing during Christmas became impossible to ignore. Thousands of people followed the case daily, but almost immediately, suspicion started turning towards Scott Peterson, and one reason stood above everything else. Detectives noticed that Scott seemed strangely calm. There were no emotional breakdowns, no frantic pleas, no visible panic. Now, to be fair, grief looks different on everybody. Some people become numb, but the public was not buying it. Less than a month after Laci's disappearance, the investigators revealed something explosive. Police revealed that Scott was having an affair. The woman's name was Amber Frey, a massage therapist and single mother. And according to Amber, Scott had told her that he was unmarried. In fact, he allegedly told her that this would be the first Christmas he would be spending without his wife. The problem? He said that before Laci disappeared. Overnight, public opinion shifted completely. To many people, Scott stopped looking like a grieving husband and started looking like a man living a double life. Amber eventually cooperated fully with investigators. Police recorded phone calls between her and Scott, and while the country was searching for Laci, Scott continued casually talking with Amber. At one point, while standing at a candlelight vigil for his missing wife, Scott allegedly told Amber that he was in Paris. Then came April 2003, 4 months after Laci disappeared. A decomposed body washed ashore near the San Francisco Bay. Soon after, the remains of a fetus was discovered nearby. Authorities confirmed the worst. The bodies were identified as Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor, and the location shocked everyone because it was near the same location where he had claimed he had gone fishing on Christmas Eve. Detectives now believed they knew exactly what had happened. Prosecutors argued Scott murdered Laci at home, transported her body in his boat, and dumped her in the bay. But there was one enormous problem. The case against Scott Peterson was entirely circumstantial. No murder weapon, no confession, no eyewitnesses, no DNA proving murder, no clear cause of death. Yet prosecutors believed the pattern of behavior told the real story. Days after the bodies were discovered, Scott Peterson was arrested near a golf course in Southern California. And immediately rumors exploded online and across television networks. Reports claimed that Scott had dyed his hair and he was carrying lots of cash and was carrying multiple cell phones. He even was carrying his brother's ID. To many people, it looked like he was preparing to flee. Scott's defense team argued something different. They claimed he feared from media harassment and was going to meet family members, and that the public had already decided his guilt. But by that point, public opinion was becoming irreversible. Every expression Scott made was analyzed. Every word he said was dissected. Every witness turned into headline news. Prosecutors painted Scott as a narcissistic husband who was desperate to escape marriage and fatherhood. They highlighted the affair, the lies, the suspicious timing, the fishing trip, and the fact that Laci and Connor's body appeared near the marina. The defense attacked the investigation itself. They argued the police locked onto Scott too early, ignored alternative suspects, ignored burglary theories, and failed to investigate sightings of Laci after Scott supposedly left home. Some witnesses claimed they saw Laci walking the dog later that morning, supposedly after Scott had left. If true, prosecutors' timeline would collapse. But the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. In November 2004, Scott was convicted of murdering Laci and Connor Peterson. He was later sentenced to death. Even after the conviction, the debate never stopped. Some people believe that Scott Peterson is obviously guilty. Others believe that the case relied too heavily on media and public pressure. In 2020, Scott's death sentence was overturned, not because he was found innocent, but because of issues involving jury selection. His conviction, however, remained intact. He was resentenced to life in prison without parole. And once again, headlines returned. But regardless of where people stand, one fact never changes. A young woman disappeared on Christmas Eve. A baby boy never got the chance to be born. And one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history still leaves people arguing more than 20 years later. The scariest cases are not always the ones with monsters hiding in the dark. Sometimes they involve someone directly smiling into a camera.